Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to those of you who have been able to join us, and perhaps we'll have more people join as we start. This webinar is brought to you by the Resource Basket, which is a program of RuralCap. I am Joy Millett, Community Development Manager at RuralCap. Resource Basket is a training and technical assistance center for those working with Native rural youth in Alaska, and we can connect you with trainers and providers across the state who can support the work you do with youth. We are funded by the Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So if you're having any problems with audio, try checking your computer speakers. There's a picture here. Just look under audio settings. If that doesn't work, you can always call the phone number that was listed in the email provided. Definitely use the chat box if you're having any problems, and we'll see if we can figure that out with you. So there's the chat box. You can also, so when you do that, you send a message to the hosts and presenters or panelists, and we'll see that. You can also use the Q&A button as we go through to ask questions, and we will have time at the end for questions. So today's presenter is Sue Armstrong, who is the Outreach Clinic and Family Coordinator at the UAA Center for Human Development. And just a little disclosure here that Sue actually is out of town, and so she recorded this last night. She wasn't realizing she was going to be out of town, so she recorded this last night. So if there are any questions that we can't answer, we will pass them on to Sue and make sure that you get the answers. All right, so I'm going to start Sue's presentation.
History and Hope curriculum. Today we'll be talking about middle childhood and adolescence and how trauma and resilience impacts and influences those age ranges. The first thing we're going to do is, because you may have been doing numerous things up until this webinar, and we've done this activity in our previous sessions, and so I want to take some time to work on to practice these brain-body healing movements so that we can in turn teach them to the clients that you work with and the community members that you have in your that you have influence over. So we're going to take some time now to do one called switching, and like I said, we've done this before if you've joined us. And this helps, it helps our bodies self-regulate. It helps the left side of our brain talk to the right side of our brain. It matches up our different brain hemispheres. And it also gives us a chance to kind of pause and stop what we had been doing, and letting our body know that this is now a time for change. And so what I want you to do is kind of emulate the person that is on the picture. So I'm going to cross my right leg over my left leg, and then I'm going to put my hands out in front of me with my thumbs down, facing down, my palms out, and I'm going to cross my left hand over my right hand, intertwine my fingers, pull them up underneath me, give myself a little bit of a hug, and I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to do a count of a breath of 3. I'm going to count 1, And we're just breathing all the way into our bodies and kind of collecting anything that we don't need right now. And we're just going to blow it out. So. 2, 3. Now you open your eyes or unfurl your arms, give them a wiggle, uncross your legs, come back, and now we're ready to move on. And so the reason we do this is we do this right now because hopefully our body is in a calm state, and then we can recognize what it feels like in our body to be self-regulated, to be brought back to center. And when we do these brain-body exercises, they really do, like I said, help us better access the 2 hemispheres of the brain. Each of them do have different roles and different parts to play. But when we're in an agitated state, it's harder to reach those. And when we think about children that have experienced trauma, it's very hard for them to access the calming parts of their brain, to be able to make transitions. So if we can teach children and adults, to teach people to calming ways of being when their bodies are calm, they might be able to tap into those when they experience scary situations or unsafe situations in their community. So today we're going to be talking about different ways that that trauma can affect us, or stress can affect us. So this first one is a typical Alaska take on a stress response. So if you think about you're walking down, and you kind of have to imagine if there's trees around, and if you're in a kind of a forest area, not in a big open space. You're walking down a pathway, and maybe I think about the fact that if I have a little one with me, and I have a 4-year-old who's gone on their own, and they're ahead of me, and then all of a sudden this mama moose comes right in between me and my 4-year-old, and not only the mama moose but her babies, and she's looking at me and I'm looking at her, and her ears are back. What does my body do? What does your body do? You don't have a form of protection with you. You're not there to hunt, to gather food for your family. You're just going on a walk, and all of a sudden this moose is in front of you. Think about what those different systems in your body would be doing. What would your heart rate be doing? What would your physical body be doing? What would your breathing be doing? Would you be breathing really fast, trying to calm your body down? Your heart would be beating fast, trying to get blood to your legs in case you need to run. You might be thinking about your 4-year-old. Your 4-year-old may turn around and say, "Mom, Dad, moose," and whether or not they come towards the moose or they start to cry. So it can be really, to me right now, talking about it, my body's having a stress response. And our bodies are supposed to experience stress. There's a system that our body goes through when they're experiencing stress. They have a stressor happens. Our brain starts to think about it. There's automatic situations that happen. That's that back part of your brain, that fight, flight, freeze part of your brain. That's automatic. You don't have control over that. And then the chemistry starts happening in your brain. Your cortisol levels change. Your adrenaline goes up. But now imagine that you faced off with this moose, and your body's remain calm-ish, and that moose decides, I'm going to keep walking. So she just She says, come on, kids. She walks off into the forest. You're able to gather your family to you. Maybe you share some deep breaths together. Maybe your body's shaking a little bit. And you reassure your child, your children, or whoever you're with that you're okay. We did it. We made it through this, and you continue on with your walk. But what would happen if every time I came out of my house, there was a moose charging at me? Or every time I went out for a walk, I'm constantly scanning for that moose. Probably the next time I go down that path, I'm going to be looking for the moose. My body's going to remember that that's where we saw a moose. My 4-year-old is going to tell stories about having seen that moose and kind of they're going to remember how they reacted to it and how the adult in their lives responded to it. Would I be able to turn that system off? No, I would be constantly in a stress response system. My body would constantly doing things. So imagine if you were a kiddo and every day you wake up and you don't know where you're going to sleep the next night. Are you going to have a place to stay? Is there going to be enough food for the day? Is this the day that your mom is going to come home and she's going to have been drinking? Or is this the time that they're in an unsafe situation due to adults not being safe with them? Or are they going to school and it's not safe at school? There's bullies at school. Somebody is physically threatening them. They've gotten into a relationship that they don't know how to get out of. And so if you can imagine what our bodies are, what children's bodies are doing, if they're constantly in this situation, they can't turn off that stress response system. It's something that's in there. It's in our brains that we don't have control over. And so what would that look like in a child? What would that show up like in their body? How might that present physically? We have children that experience stomach aches, constipation, diarrhea. Their heart rates go up, their blood sugars go up. They might complain of chronic headaches. They may have a hard time breathing because their bodies the important parts of what's supposed to be going on in their body is being funneled in places that it's not supposed to be funneled to. If we think about the risk factors that are in Alaska, we think about the high rates of obesity and the high rates of diabetes. Domestic violence is the second strongest predictor of obesity in Alaska children. And so that stress affects the obesity and the diabetes risk. And it's not necessarily that it's happening immediately. These are things that could have been going on for generations. If there was food scarcity and multiple generations ago, our bodies were conditioned to say, you need to store food and you need to store it in a certain way. So as people, generations grow, certain bodies have evolved that way, and it doesn't even have to be a stressful situation that has currently going on with children, but it's something that's been going on. And we talk about that's the history part of that social ecological model. It's things that are beyond even the parents' control, but there are some things that are within our control that we can do to help the children in our lives. Our bodies, we're designed to, like we've talked about, we're designed to experience stress. There's the stress that gets you prepared to take a test. There's if you've ever taken a driver's test. If you've been involved in sports, the idea that it's the 9th inning and there's 2 outs and you're the one that can save the game. Those are positive stressors, but eventually your body goes back to a homeostasis. It goes back to the way that it's supposed to be in a level playing field, so to say. And those are good stressors. Our body should kind of experience those at a variety of times, and we should feel what it feels like to go back to that normal state. But then there's the other side of the scale where we're looking at toxic stress. That's the stress that we experience regarding abuse and neglect. When we're not sure where we're going from one day to the next. Those are the things that cause our brain architecture to change and are just really damaging to our brains and to our bodies. And there's this middle one, this tolerable stress, and those are the things that some of the times we can't. We're in a state where we have earthquakes. We have major different parts of our state experience some pretty major storms and different catastrophes like that. And one of the things that the studies show is that what children can experience a stressful situation, and it really depends about how the adults around them respond to that situation. So if there is an abuse situation going on around a child that can be remedied, and they really look at what are those effects of what's going on. What is the adults around them? How are they handling the situation? How are they staying self-regulated and letting children know that they are going to be safe, that they can take care of them if that is possible? And so these are some of those physiological stress responses that children are at risk for, and that people are at risk for. Asthma, allergies, diabetes, headaches, all these things that can make children sicker so that they're not able to go to school, that affects their growth and development, that affects how they learn, when they learn, and then how do they feel inside, which then can impact the way that they behave on the outside. What does that look like in children and in adults? And so, we talked a little bit about the physiology. What are some of the stressors that our bodies go through? But we also think about what our brain development is. What is our neural development? And this is an analogy. Some of you may have seen this already before, but this is an analogy borrowed from Josh Harbison. He's the director of the Alaska Children Trauma Center. And this is a picture. This is a road. This is the way that our brain is supposed to process information when we're in the thinking part of our brain, when they're in that prefrontal cortex, when we're in a calm state. So we may observe a situation, and in the input comes in. We see it, we hear it, we smell it. Our brain interprets it. We process information. We think about our options. We make a plan, and then we act on it. If you think about if you're as an adult, having to make a decision between, you need to make a medical appointment, but you also have to be at work. How do you weigh your options? You get a call that says, hey, can you come into the clinic right now? And you think about, well, when am I going to get my next appointment? Do I need to talk to my boss about where I'm going, that I need to make this appointment? I think about which way is faster way to get home. Is it safe to go out on the river? These are things that we think about, and we may take other people's opinions or advice in, but we're planful in those actions. But in that case of the moose, you may think of a different analogy as well, but when danger happens, when something that's not safe happens, our body automatically reacts. So we may bring that information in and interpret it, but we're going to react. So we're going to observe, interpret, react, and act. And so there's a detour that happens in that in this situation. It's what allows us to put on our brakes when we see something out of the corner of our eye. It's what causes us to grab hold of the soda before it falls onto the ground. These are the adaptations that keep us safe. But if time and time again the road starts to erode around us, our system, our brain just goes observe and act. It just starts to observe and react. And so what happens with a kiddo who's constantly around danger or is used to danger and has adapted to it? So they're always looking for danger. They're extremely hyper aware. They're always looking around to see what's going to happen around them. So that's when that express route becomes a super highway. There's a total, there's lots of blockage on the regular road. That's the route that's easiest for the brain to travel. And then it becomes harder and harder for them to access the more slow planning, thinking, deliberate way of going about a situation. And that becomes more difficult for them to access. And how, think about how that might show up in behavior. If before, if somebody looked at, if a kiddo stuck their tongue out at another one, they may see that and maybe roll their eyes and think, I'm going to go tell the teacher, and then get up and go tell the teacher. But if this alarm system is constantly there, a kid may, stick their tongue out at another one, and the other child, for reasons that have nothing to do with the child sticking their tongue out at them, may react and, punch that child or hurt that child in a way. And so they're impulsive, they're really reactive. They may be seen as quote unquote hyper. They may have a harder time thinking about what they do before they do it. But this isn't permanent. If you look closely at the bottom, there's still road there. There's just lots of boulders and dust, but there's still a road under that alarm system. So, excuse me, the hope part of this is that our brains are plastic and our body wants to heal. And the way that one of the words that we use is neuroplasticity. And at the end of this video, or at the end of this webinar, I have a video link to a video that's on the Alaska Resiliency Initiative website. And so maybe if there's time at the end, you'll have time to watch it, or feel free to go to the Alaska Resiliency Initiative website on your own, and you can and see if you want a better visual of what neuroplasticity is. But it means the brain has the ability to change. It can always be shaped, and that we can heal our brains and our bodies. And as community members and as program directors, and in the role that you have working with your clients, that you have a very important role to play in this changing the brain. So if scary things or unsafe things have already happened to children, there is ways to pick up those boulders, to move, to repave that road. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of it takes more work. And so if we look at this diagram, look at this cycle, what are children coming into your program? How are they showing up in your program? What history are they carrying with them? What experiences have they had? So this is a part of what happens at home or what happens around them in their community. But how does what's happened to them, what they've experienced, how does that then go to show us, how do they show what they've experienced? And so because children act out in ways because they don't have they have reactions instead of responses. They don't have that opportunity to wait and think about it. Their brains have been geared to do those pathways. And then they're punished for it. So it they experience traumas, they have a deficit in how they handle them in social emotional ways, and the system doesn't recognize, the system being the school system, the judicial system. If you think about the different systems that children are in, they don't recognize, or they don't know that what the impact of adverse childhood experiences are, and then through that punishment, they're re-traumatized by punishment for those behaviors, and that punishment can have an increase in the number of ACEs that impacts a child, and but also how they feel about themselves. So just looking at the cycle, if you think about your programs and where does your program fit in disrupting this cycle? Because what we know about, what we're learning about is that the more that we know, the more that we can prevent. So if we know that a child has experienced trauma, or that a community is experiencing trauma, how do we put in those prevention measures to teach all children, the children who have experienced trauma, and children who may not have, or that it hasn't shown up yet? What are those, how early is early intervention for the people in our communities, so that it doesn't lead to additional trauma that could have been prevented. So, so this is just a picture about, if you think about children in school, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the average age that a child is expelled from school. Some people might think it's high school. Some people may think it's middle school, and it's actually at 4 years old. It's in preschool. If your community has a child development center or a daycare, if your school system has a preschool program, if you have Head Start in your community, children are that part. What we've learned about brain development is that children don't have access to that front part of their brain, to that prefrontal cortex, until people don't have access completely to it until they're well into their 20s. So by expecting a child to be able to stop and think, and for even those children who have not experienced trauma, is a lot to put on a child. And so as adults, we're expecting children to behave in a certain way, and then when they don't conform to sitting down and being good listeners and helping their friends and not hurting other children, then they're punished for their behavior. And children start thinking about, as young as 4 years old, that I'm a bad kid, that I don't belong at school, that school's not a safe place. And so, once again, how do the programs in your community, the program that you work with, what kind of influences do you have in your community and with your school district to really address this? Because we know that that the increase in trauma and the effects of the trauma, that really does contribute to the school to prison pipeline. And it's like funneling kids with trauma into the criminal justice system. And I know that your programs are working on prevention, or working on alternative situations for children who have experiences and then have made choices that, whether they weren't safe or they were beyond, there's just situations that they get themselves into, or that occur around them that impact their future. And so what does that look like? In addition to trauma experiences that children have, or adverse childhood experiences, we know that children with disabilities are more likely to be bullied by their peers. So they've experienced extra trauma from their peers, and they're also, children with disabilities are more likely to be punished. If we look at race and ethnicity, that there's lots and lots of data to back up that there's significant racial disparities at school, with school suspensions, with expulsions. with the way that people view certain children with certain certain children they've done studies, and here is just a little snippet of one. But there's research out of Georgetown University that shows that people view black girls as less innocent, as less childlike, and that so that they're treating them, they're looking at their motives as adult motives rather than treating them like children. And there's also research that shows that also, in addition, for African American boys, that people will look at a 12-year-old boy and think that he's 15 or 16, so they treat them as a 15 or 16-year-old, and they don't see him as a child, and allow him to have the same kind of childhood. We also see major disparities with our Alaska Native children as well. And in addition to children with disabilities or looking at the racial disparities, we also have to really look at how our communities address the safety environments for all children. Some of you may know that the children who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender nonconforming, or those who are perceived to be, are more likely to be bullied by their peers, so that they're experiencing that extra stress and trauma from that bullying. And there's lots of times they feel like schools are not doing anything about it. There was this survey that found that 50% of youth have said that school didn't do anything in response to homophobic remarks. So the school was not keeping them safe either. In addition to that, LGBTQ youth are 3 times as likely to be suspended or expelled for the same misbehavior as their heterosexual peers. They're most likely to be punished as well. And so just think about what are the attitudes in your community? What have you heard? And what is your whether or not we think we're doing it, we may be doing it without even knowing we're doing it. So just keeping these things in mind to see how our actions and our community's actions can have an impact on the children in our lives. So, but what we know, like I said before, what is known can be prevented. And these are things that can be addressed in our communities. How do we create safe, welcoming environments for all children, regardless of their identity, their trauma history, and how do we, what do we need to do to help stop the cycle of trauma leading to punishment? So it's important to understand that all these dynamics are affecting our kids in our communities that they're growing up in. And, what are they bringing into the communities, into the schools, into your prevention programs or your outreach programs, that with the experiences that they have lived through, that they're coming to us with. We have children, we have communities that are experiencing chronic grief, that they're experiencing major losses in their community through disease or accidents or suicide, or a combination of all 3 of those. And then how does the community react? What is their response to that grief? Do they hold each other up? Do they make sure everybody's included? There's the experiences of potlatch that they look different in different communities throughout Alaska, and there's definitely different Alaska Native traditions, and as well as other traditions in different cultures as well. But it's the idea of connecting and cementing social relationships that really can bring teenagers and all children together, and families together. So grieving within a community rather than on your own, it really helps that grieving and loss cycle. And so we think about, how do we support healthy children? Community gatherings in any situation can help parents feel more connected, can bring communities together so they can experience joyful being together rather than always coming together for sadness. You know, what are the opportunities in your community where people come together in a time of joy? It doesn't have to be something very extravagant. It can, come together to witness the senior day of basketball, or coming together to come to a Head Start graduation, or just say, hey, we're going out and we're going to go run up and down the street and see who we can high five. Because when parents have strong social supports and connections with each other, that helps reduce child maltreatment. If families have access to traditional customary traditions and access to nature, that's definitely a protective factor that helps build healthy children. When families are out on the land and on the water, doing things in a good way, that builds resilience and family connection. And things that, healthcare definitely helps support healthy children. And we know that access to that can be problematic in some of our communities. Not every community has access to face-to-face access to a doctor. They do have a clinic if the family can get in. Is it a priority to be seen? And so, in addition to healthcare, access to housing. Alaska is the second most expensive place for housing in the country. And so, what are communities doing to help with safe housing practices and access? And then food. Having access to healthy food, healthy traditional foods really matters to kids. 20% of children in Alaska live in households where there's not enough food, or they experience food insecurity. Having food insecurity or not having enough food, having the right nutrients going in, can lead to illness, can lead to sickness, can make kids feel tired and not want to go to school. It affects their growth and development. And so how do we support families to have access to food assistance in our communities is really important, but also looking at those policy decisions. If we're looking at that socio-ecological model, what are policy decisions and economic decisions that are impacting and affecting families? And all of these things are affecting our brains and our bodies and the genes of our children, and what they're coming to us with, what they're coming to school with, what they're coming to church with, what they're coming into our events with. And these our children are going to be the adults in their community. And so what are the things that we can put in place now that can really bring forward that hope and that positive change in our future? And so that was middle childhood, but I think a lot of those resources also, and all those thoughts can also be moved in with adolescence. And so when we're thinking about adolescence, the programs that are on the call today, that are what do healthy communities look like? What are the programs that are working with developing strong youth leaders in the communities? What does early intervention look like in your community? And what are the programs that you have in place if children have, because they're children, if children have made mistakes or gotten into a situation that's not a safe one, what are they able to do to help change those, to change the path that they're on? Sometimes it just takes a little nudge to stay on a safer path than going down the one that's going to have a hard time moving those boulders out of the way. And so really looking at what are we doing to supporting healthy teens. We know that that teenagers are still continue to be influenced by adults in their lives. They are still children. That what are the caregivers? Do they realize how important they are to the caregivers in their lives? But they also spend more time without the grown-ups in their lives. They spend more time in their community, and sometimes those activities can lead to poor choices being made, or being in a situation that they didn't anticipate being in, and things happen, and that's where when if things happen and there's restitution that needs to be made, or that with our current system, punishment for reacting to situations that are brought on from trauma behaviors that will most likely lead to continuously going from school to the prison pipeline. It's really important for us to address that in any way possible, that we can prevent children who have experienced trauma from spiraling into those situations. And I think that's really what a lot of your programs are working on. How do we be that buffer? How do we influence not only the children but their families and our communities, and what are the policies in place that really shape the impact of decisions that teenagers make. And sometimes they don't realize that the impact that their decisions will have on others. And we also know that even if kids haven't grown up with, they've grown up in a pretty stable household, they've had pretty stable relationships, that as they grow up and they move away from their family, they may experience an abusive relationship with other teenagers, or get into situations where they find themselves surrounded by not safe people. So how do we like, those situations can affect them for the rest of their lives. And so really the next couple of slides are different resources, and at the end of this presentation there's a printout of all of these, how do you access these resources. And some of you may already have these resources. They may be things like, Sue, why are you showing this to us? But if people don't know about them, I wanted to share them with everyone today. And so, and these are resources if people wanted them and didn't have a way of getting them. Joy could contact me, and I can get a hold of people to get some of these printed out. I have seen them in different presentations that I've been at. And so, it's really about healthy relationships. How do we define what our healthy relationship is? What does a healthy relationship look like in your community? What is the gold standard? Who do you look at and go, oh, that's the couple, or those are the friends I want to look like when I, are there 6 and 7-year-olds that go, oh, I want to be like those kids right there, because they're always together. They look like they're having fun. And so these are just additional tools these are cards that help navigate relationships, when to get help, when to walk away. There's also these videos on YouTube and also on ANTHC's Epicenter. I think there's 11 of them, and they look at they're Alaskan youth talking about healthy and unhealthy relationships. There's people have heard about the 4th R. It's a broken record. Healthy relationships, safe choices. How do you connect? How do you keep youth connected? What does that look like in your community? What does it look like throughout Alaska? And I think, also what does it look like in different parts of the country as well? How do we talk to teens about, this is parents and caregivers talking about, how do they have conversations with teens about healthy relationships? we know that domestic violence and sexual assault are so high in our country, in our state. You know, I don't think there's ever a time that's too early to talk about these relationships and what to expect. But if nobody's ever talked to children about it, you may be the first one that talks to them about this situation or about this topic. And then we also know that children, you know, while they still hang out with each other, they look at each other, they do spend more time on their phones with social media. And what are the tools that we have in place that say, hey, put that down and look at me? Or, you know, what does cyberbullying look like? When is it safe to, how do we know who's safe to interact with? You know, we think about safe sharing of information and pictures online. And like I said, all of these resources are at the end of this webinar. And so if we think about what are some of those, what are some of the activities that are ingrained in our community that help children, that help support healthy teens, whether they're programs that are inside of the school, whether they're after-school programs, whether they're built into the community, whether they're being arranged, they're new, they used to go on and they kind of died out and they're coming back. You know, so when teens are involved in meaningful activities outside of school, they're much less likely to use drugs or alcohol and less likely to engage in risky behaviors. And so whether that's after school, you know, and if there's engineering programs, if it's a certain kind of club that is, you know, they say we need to do this, whether it's dancing, whether it's culture camp in the summer, those are those protective activities that provide meaningful opportunities for youth and just allow kids to be kids, no real expectations of responsibilities except to be happy and to get along with each other, which is a big responsibility. And so, you know, what does this look like in your community? And, you know, we've talked about a couple of different cultural practices and opportunities that people have in different communities. And this is one that was shared for the curriculum. And some people may be aware of this. And you may think of different practices that you have in your community based on your based on cultural strengths and resilience. But this is one with the naming practices. So if you think about in the Yupik culture, and if this continues, some communities have this and some communities don't. And so when, you know, an infant is born and they're giving the name of someone who's passed away, that so if an elder woman's husband passes away and a baby's born, that baby is given the husband's name, and then that child, the baby grows up, and they're in that reciprocal relationship. They have somebody that's always happy to see them, that wants to hold them, that will call out to them when they see them at the school or they see them at the store, and in turn that infant grows up and knows that there's that special person who always says hi to them whenever they see them. And there's also that relationship where as the child grows, they may take care of the elder. They may bring them firewood. They may bring them food. The elder may, you know, in turn, make sure that child has a safe place to stay, or that they themselves are fed. And so there's that built-in reciprocity and mutuality, and that there's that sense of responsibility. So you're not just yourself. You're not just part of your nuclear family. You're part of your community, and you really have a responsibility to somebody else. And then as that child grows, they become bigger and stronger, and they can help that person in other ways. And then they also themselves may then have somebody that they're looking out for. As they grow older, there's somebody that comes up behind them that can share in that relationship. And you're not only, and you're building new connections and supports, you're getting new relatives, and you're strengthening your community as a whole. And there are many other practices that go along that you know are not mentioned in this curriculum, and then if they are important in your community, you know, sharing them and making them. How do you make them be known in your community? How are they? Are they important? Have they died out and they need to be? And is there an interest in them being brought back? It's, you know, that's up to the community to really decide what do we want to bring forward and what do we want to leave behind. And so we think about teenagers, we think about adolescents, that teenagers really need meaning. They need to have what's their purpose? What are they doing with their lives? Who cares about them, and who are they taking care of? And it's really grounding for them to know that they have a responsibility to others and to themselves. And that is the way, so it's something to draw on when you're looking at, you know, the makeup of your groups. You know, what is important to them? What makes them click? And recognize that the strength that each one of them comes with. We all come with our own experiences, and when we work together, how do our experiences that we have, how do they bring together? You know, how does my relationship affect somebody else? And when you're a teenager and you're thinking about that, you don't have all the answers. You may think you have all the answers, but you don't have all the answers. But how do you really draw on those strengths of that adolescent so that they can continue to move forward on a positive path, and make their way into adulthood? And so that was today's webinar. And so if you've been with us from the beginning, we've gone through the intro of the History and Hope curriculum. You know, we briefly talked about what the ACE study was, and just now we talked about how adverse childhood experiences really affect us through the lifespan with that socio-ecological model. And how does stress affect our bodies in a variety of ways? And so for the final week, which is on December 7th, if you are available to join us on December 7th from 1 to 2, from 11 to 12. I'm sorry, that was hopefully my only mistake I've made so far. And we'll be talking about, you know, how do the adverse childhood experiences show up in our learning settings? How do they impact us in the work that you guys do? What has brought children to the place where they may have a record? They may have they may need some pretty intensive interventions, or they just may need a little bit of guidance. And what do we put in place? And what is the 7th is the time to really look at your program and look at what do you already have in place that is very beneficial to children who have experienced trauma, as well as all children. And also, what are some of those things, those next steps? What is the next step you want to take in really helping to address trauma in children, and how to help them move forward in that positive path? So I want to thank you for being with me, for being here today. And I do want to know specifically for our next session, if there's anything that I haven't touched on, if there was something that was confusing, because the last session, December 7th, I would really like to be a little bit more interactive, maybe sharing maybe sharing what programs are doing and where they are currently. And so I'll be working with Joy to maybe gather some of that information before December 7th. And so here are the resources that I talked about. We will get those out to you in an email format or whatever format is available, as well as here's the neuroplasticity email video. And so these two things I will email Joy so that she can get to you guys. I mean, you can watch them or do further research on your own time. Thank you very much, and I definitely appreciate your attention and everything that you do for the children of Alaska.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who's participated today. This webinar will be available on the Resource Basket website in the next week. And we hope to see you. We hope to see you again or hear from you again on December 7th for our final webinar in this series. If you have any questions or comments or between now and then, please email us at resourcebasket@ruralcap.com. Thank you and have a great day.